Hi there, it's Rob. Congratulations on your recent show role allocation as Chief Electrician. This podcast is about the role of Chief, and I suggest you take a listen to it and make some notes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start off just discussing a bit about going over the hierarchy of the electrics team and where the Chief Elect fits into that. I'll go on then to talk about some key skills that you'll need as a Chief Electrician, and the paperwork that you'll be heavily involved with, either not necessarily creating all the time, but also working with as a chief. And then we'll finish up with some of the responsibilities of the chief elects from the start of a production role to the finish. So take a listen to this, and it will hopefully improve your practice and your show role as a chief elects. So the role of Chief Electrician is a theatre title. There's a lot of other roles in different areas of the event and production industry. In touring theatre, quite often the sort of chief electrician, the person who's the head of the electrics department on tour, is often called the production elects, or they call them proddies. Sometimes the chief also has to deal with the touring relights, which means that the lighting designer doesn't attend every show on the tour, and the chief electrician or production elects is also in charge of the relighting and the focusing, and basically making sure the show stays on track. In our role in TP, we tend to take a traditional theatre chief electrician, which is the sort of head of lighting. Now, the chief elects fits underneath the role of lighting designer, who's obviously the person who makes all the artistic decisions, decides what type of light maybe they want, particularly maybe the colour scheme and the positions of things, where they'll go. In the UT and also in other venues around the university, we tend to have it so the lighting designer does all of the planning and produces the lighting plan, and the chief elects basically actions that plan as part of a team. So the chief elect sits below the lighting designer and above all of the assistants and the crew that work in the electric side of things. Generally, the way we run shows in TP is that the chief elects doesn't sit above the sound department. So the sound department will kind of work alongside. The electrics department, in this case, is kind of the lighting department. In some theatres, that's not the case. The chief elects is kind of in charge of both sides, lighting, sound, and maybe video as well. But they're kind of more of a manager above all of these other specialists in the different areas of the electrics department. So you can think of the chief elects as like a kind of lighting manager and an enabler, really, somebody who makes sure that the system's available for the lighting designer and for all the other creatives to be able to do their work. The key skills that you'll need as a chief elects, the most important one, I can't stress this enough, is your abilities in organisation and planning. It's basically basic stage management. It has a bit of an electrics bent to it, obviously because you're in the electrics department, but basically it's stage management, old-fashioned, assume nothing and leave nothing to chance. This is pretty much, I'd say 95.6% of the entire job of the chief elects is good organisation and planning. If you manage out stuff early on, then you don't have any problems and you don't have the kind of issues that you might have if you hadn't had all that foresight and all of the preparation. Another key skill is to be quite methodical in your workflow, and also general tidiness. Be on top of the tidiness of the way that the system's installed, the lighting's installed, the cabling, the way things are done up, tightened up, lanterns are tightened properly. All these good working practices that really save a day when problems arise. And actually, if you, again, manage out these particular problems with good working practices, you don't actually have to deal with them. Another skill is obviously your prioritisation of things that need doing. So things will always happen, things will need fixing, the LD will want to change things, and it's up to you really to sort of prioritise and to record things that need doing so that you can then divvy them out to your team. Talking about the team, obviously the chief elects is in charge of usually a small team, a team of assistant electricians, and the key point of being a manager of any team, even a small or a large team, but is to keep everybody working. So that's where your management skills come into play. You also need an understanding of the lighting system and the components. So, knowing how fixtures work, how to change the lamp in a particular lantern or whatever, even if you don't do it, your assistants will have to do it. And if you're managing people, you expect to know things that they know, so you can make sure you allocate jobs to the right person, stuff like that. You don't have to have such an in-depth understanding of a lighting system on university shows as you may do in a professional theatre as chief elects. You can get away with actually just having a user manual for things, so equipment is very complex, and a lot of life these days in the technical space, in lighting, sound and video for us in the profession, is basically to be able to look up things in the manual when you need them. But a basic understanding of the system is important so that you can fault find and you can come up with solutions to problems and things like that. Ideally, a Chief Elect would have some basic electrical skills and knowledge, but for us this is kind of less important than you'd really think when you were starting out. As things get much more complex in terms of the lighting system, then it's important to have these skills, as particularly if you're designing complex lighting systems in unknown venues or touring lighting. But in uni shows, in the UT and around the campus and other venues we work in, actually the electrical skills and knowledge are probably the least important things that you need, certainly below all of the organisation and planning stuff. This is the misconception that people have about being a Chief Elect and why they get worried about it, is because they think that they don't know anything about electrics. Actually, it's mostly about management and planning. Okay, so let's talk just for a few minutes about the key paperwork that you will be involved with as Chief Elects. Obviously, the plan is a big part of the lighting department's life. It's where all of the information is stored, where the lighting designer does their planning, and also where you will probably spend a lot of time writing things on it or making changes to it or following it, or it's almost like the blueprint for what the lighting designer wants. In university shows, the plan and all of the associated stuff is generally done by the LD, along with the fixture or the lantern schedule, which is something, again, that they will produce, but it will become the sort of Bible, particularly for the Chief Elects and all the team, the starting point, and also making changes as they go along. So the lantern schedule is very important. You'll also probably have to prepare an equipment inventory, so you know what kit you want, and ideally that would include every lantern, every accessory, everything you need to hire, and also cables and anything else that you need to put the show on. Other paperwork you would probably end up using as a Chief Elect, maybe you'd be providing some programming notes, perhaps like groups that you need to create for the lighting designer, your pre-show checks, so lists of things that you need to tick off for your pre-show checks in the same way as you do as an ASM, and also possibly cable allocations or calculations. In some shows for a Chief Elect this will be electrical calculations, and particularly on very busy and large-scale shows with a hired equipment inventory, it'll also be cable allocations so that you can specify exactly how many hundreds of cables of a particular type you need. For the UT shows, and often for other shows around a university, we don't really tend to spend a lot of time specifying individual cables, but it's no bad thing to do that, because the last thing you want to do is go to the store and find you don't have enough cable. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the role of the chief, how they fit into the department, and the skills and some of the paperwork you'll be using to get the show on the road. Finally, let's just quickly talk about the responsibilities for you as a Chief Elect. Part of the Chief Elect's role as a manager is to ensure the safe working environment for the electrics department, so make sure that any safety procedures are designed and adhered to. It might be on shows, particularly touring shows or shows with a lot of changing systems, that the Chief Elects will also maybe create risk assessments or method statements on some shows. It's possibly on a show-by-show basis, depending on if it's a one-off show or whatever. In the UT, we tend to have established working practices, and that would mean that you wouldn't necessarily produce a method statement for absolutely everything, unless you were going to do something particularly unusual, in which case creating a method statement and a risk assessment will be a good way of showing that you've come through the process of designing out a particular risk from a particular way of working. I say a lot of the processes in the UT particularly are just established safety processes, and you just make sure they're followed. Another big part of the role for the chief, particularly early on, is to gather information both for the lighting designer and also from them regarding what they want in terms of equipment or in terms of any special facility they need to get their show on. You sometimes, as a Chief Elect, will have to plan the electrical side of things and how things will be plugged up into the venue or the allocation of equipment. The lighting designer on some shows might say, I just want a profile spot that's this kind of size, and then you then go to your venue and see what they have and then offer the lighting designer alternatives before deciding where you think they're going to be plugged in electrically. It varies from different shows, but most of the work that we do in the UT in other places is this work is done by the LD. So the LD decides exactly which lantern we've got from stock they're going to use and also where it's going to plug in. But in other roles, the Chief Elects might well take that, and the lighting designer will simply just design the lighting, and the Chief Electrician will design the system. The chief elects can also take part in scheduling decisions from the elect's point of view, so in conjunction with the production manager and the lighting designer, allocation of people, times it will take to put things in, times it will take to make changes, to do the focus, whatever. The chief elects will also maybe have an input on that. Again, as part of the pre-show process, the chief elects will also order the kit and ensure that everything's prepared and tested, ready for the elects getting, including the stuff that comes from the house stock. So obviously this includes lighting, and in theatre it can also include the cans and the cue light system. And this is what we do in the UT. So the chief elects deals with the cans and the cue lights, obviously not necessarily on their own, they have a team that helps them do it, but they're basically in charge of making sure all that works. In other situations, in other theatres and perhaps on tours and big one-off shows, the cans and the cue lights are often provided by the sound company, and that's because that's the kind of equipment they carry. But in the UT, the chief elects deals with that, and the sound and video simply deal with the projection and the playback of sound. Obviously, as chief, you have to lead and manage the electrics crew. This might include their assessment of their abilities and possibly additional training for your crew. So it's an idea to get them all together and make sure that they're all au fait with any particular procedure you might want them to perform, even if it's just, hanging a lantern or focusing a source 4 or whatever. Just check that everybody's up to speed with that, because when you get into the theatre, if you have people who know how to change a lamp or know how to focus quickly with an LD, it's a great asset rather than having to sort of train them on the job. You also need to obviously ensure their welfare and safety, make sure procedures are being adhered to, also that the system that they're putting the system in as you wish them to, and also make sure they get their breaks and stuff like that. So you become a kind of a bit of a social worker for the electrics department as well. It's part of your role as chief to allocate the work either identified by yourself or from notes from the LD. The usual practice is to kind of create a snagging list of things to do, and that includes faults that need to be sorted out, things that haven't been done yet, stuff that hasn't been rigged, things that haven't been tested. Obviously, testing is a big thing in all technical departments, and again, that will be things on your snagging list. We haven't rigged the smoke machine and we haven't tested it yet, so we need to do both of those things before we can say we're ready for smoke. It's also the chief's role to assist the LD in noting any changes or deviations from the original plan. So if channels get changed or fixtures get moved, the chief elects will also note those things down along with the lighting designer, so that everyone has an up-to-date record of where things are plugged in and where they are. That might mean drawing things on the plan, or it might include scribbling over the fixture list and rewriting stuff, all that kind of thing. But it's also up to the chief to keep up with that. But the lighting designer will also do it. The aim of the electrics department and to you as chief is to provide a working lighting system and also cans and communication for as much of the time required by the LD and in a timely manner, so being ready for stuff. So overseeing any fault finding and try and have a full working knowledge of the system. You should also offer solutions to the lighting designer regarding changes or new requests. So maybe they say, actually, I think we want to do this now and I'm not sure how we're going to do it. And perhaps as a chief elect, you might say, well, we have a couple of these lanterns spare, and I suggest that perhaps we rig them there and plug them into that particular socket. It's basically the idea of provision of facility. So you're providing a system, a lighting system that does what the LD wants it to, in the colours and the focus and everything else you want. And it means the really good chief elects works to ensure that that system and that provision is maintained as much as possible, so that at no point is anybody waiting around for stuff to be mended or things that aren't available or stuff that hasn't been done yet. When it comes to doing that, obviously some of that may well be fault finding. Now you try and design out all your fault finding by good preparation and planning, and you can really cut down on that with all that pre-production work. But inevitably you do have faults to find, and some skills there require a sort of a methodical approach. And ideally, I think best is some really good labelling and documentation, particularly of complex cabling systems. Now, in the UT system, a lot of lanterns are just hung on bars and plugged straight into the nearest socket. That's not very complex. But in a particularly complex touring environment, you might have a lot of cables, and they could ideally, everything would be marked so that if there was any issues with any of it, you can go straight to the fault and you can find it straight away. A lot of touring electricians and really good production electricians spend a lot of the tour, especially the first few legs of the tour, just labelling things. They go around with a label maker and they label things like mad, and you think that they were going a bit over the top, but actually it saves them a lot of time and every subsequent fit up and every time there's a fault. Now, you don't necessarily need to go around with a label maker, but the concept of labelling things properly with Alex tape and a Sharpie and stuff is a good one to follow. Even though in the UT particularly, it's not so necessary because of the way the system works. As Chief Elects, as I mentioned earlier, you should be able to prioritise any issues and decide whether you're going to deal with them immediately or get your team to deal with them immediately, or suggest that the work moves on to be returned to a later time, maybe in working light, or maybe when it's quiet, or when there's not people on stage, or when there's a better time to deal with it. So you might suggest to the lighting designer that you move on in the middle of the focus, while one of your team maybe goes and changes the lamp and the lighting designer focuses another lantern. So it's that prioritisation thing I was talking about earlier. As chief, you may well be involved in the programming, particularly in the university theatre. The chief often does a lot of the programming initially because they're the person with more skills than their assistants when it comes to using the lighting desk. It doesn't always follow. Quite often on a lot of shows, the assistant electrician will have skills in using the lighting control, and the chief will just manage things from a distance while the assistants get stuck into the programming for the lighting designer. It's important that you do know how to run the desk and also help anyone, and also ensure that your assistants can perform any task that you need to. So if they just need to be able to call up channels, then you need to make sure that your assistants know how to do that. Otherwise, you'll be forever chasing your tail trying to teach them on the job. When it comes to the running of the show, the chief elects and the electrics department's job obviously is to ensure a working system, designing and leading the pre-show checks for you as chief, which probably include things like a full rig check before every show, testing of practicals and the communication system, and that's every cue light and everything, the band and the working lights if there are some, and it often includes a cue to check the show in the lighting desk. It's quite useful on short runs to do that in the UT, particularly when the programming has been changed a lot about by novice operators and the show hasn't really been checked. A lot of the short run stuff we do in the UT, a lot of the programming is still happening and there isn't that time for it to bed in. And so when you play the show back on the first night, you find there was a cue in the wrong place. So cue to cue is always useful. And again, just manage problems that are arising during the show, or ideally beforehand, by managing out all these issues and things that arise by good checks before and also contingencies. But also sometimes the chief might have to come up with some creative solutions to work around an immediate problem and provide alternatives. You know, if you lose a working light, what can you do that will sort that out in the time you've got available with the kit you've got there just before the show goes up, that sort of thing. The chief elect is usually pretty involved in the runs of the TP shows because it's usually quite a short run. In theatres, there's different ways of keeping up with a long-running show, and quite often there's obviously a show crew or people who do the evening performances, and then there'll be notes and snagging lists that then are passed down to a day crew, and they often call them daymen. And they're dealt with during, things are fixed and focuses are checked and lamps are changed and stuff like that. So that's how it works. But normally in TP shows, as I say, the chief elect is very hands-on throughout the process because of the nature of the runs. On larger shows, and particularly one-off shows, there are kind of specialists within the lighting department, but they're all still managed by a role similar to the chief. So they might be a head of lighting, or they might be a head of something, head of technical or something. But basically, there's always somebody at the top of the crew, as it were, who may or may not be the lighting designer, and particularly on a smaller show or a show that's more of a one-off show, the kind of chief elect's role and lighting designer on a shows of a certain scale is combined into one. So you're kind of basically the head of lighting in that sense. So hopefully that's given you a few ideas and hopefully working towards a good show role for you as chief elects. Good luck with it. Don't forget, most of it is organisation and prior planning and preparation, and it's a lot of fun being a chief elects, even if you don't particularly like lighting, and particularly if you're a stage manager. If you fancy yourself as a stage manager, then you can really show off your stage management skills while in the role of chief elects. Good luck, and I'll see you soon.